Say hello to your fellow friends.
Please help, we're being held hostage.
Yeah, they're happy campers. Okay.
Where did we leave off at?
Like number.
Okay, we are going to try to finish up the terms, and I am going to video it, and then that way it'll be on the LMS, and those that our class is dwindling down to nothing over here, so the rest of you can perhaps watch it at home. All right, so we need to pick up with, I think we stopped at bills of attainder and ex post facto laws. And I was going to ask you guys to give me some of the definitions. So did anybody look that up, ex post facto law?
What number's up?
Or bill of attainder? Bill of attainder is 27, ex post facto is 28.
Did I do it at the post office?
No, not at all.
Which criminalize activities that are not crimes when they are committed or require harsher punishments than were mandated at the time of the act.
Right. All that means is that after something happens, they make it illegal. Okay. So how can, you can set some people up that way, and that is not constitutional. Ex post facto laws. Of course, that's Latin, and it just means after the fact. So, you guys go skipping down the hallway. I don't know that there's anything in the handbook that says skipping down the hallway is demerit worthy. But if all of a sudden I stood out there and I said, I'm writing all of y'all up for skipping down the hallway, that's ex post facto. I'm making it against the law after you've already done it. Hey, Austin. So does that make sense? You guys with me? And then bills of attainder is when you just automatically punish somebody before you even try them. You grab somebody up and you're guilty of X, Y, or Z, take them out and hang them. Or or you fine them a certain fine without any kind of a trial. You can't do that. In the United States, that is not constitutional. You cannot have any bills of attainder where you punish people before there's a trial, and you cannot make something illegal after they've already done it, ex post facto law, just because you're wanting to get them in trouble. Then we've got some amendments. The 15th, 19th, and 27th Amendment all have to do with voting. All have to do with the voting franchise. 15 gave who the right to vote? Blacks. Okay.
Black men.
Yeah, black men, that's a good point. The freed men. And so that gave them the right to vote, or suffrage. So you should know that word, suffrage or franchise. Having the voting franchise is suffrage. Okay, so you may see it in any of those terms. So anyway, so the 15th Amendment gave freed men, former slaves, black men basically, the right to vote. Who received the right to vote with the 19th Amendment? Women. The 19th Amendment in 1920 gave women the right to vote.
Is that black and white women?
Yes, it's black and white women. And then the 27th Amendment gave who the right to vote? Young people, 18 years and older. Before the 27th Amendment, you had to be 21. Now you can be 18. Some people want to reduce it down to 16.
It should be like 30.
I would be more.
People are so dumb. Maybe me too, because I'm young. Maybe I'm dumb too.
Well, we all learn as we go, and
Yeah,
yes,
I mean,
we don't make wise decisions oftentimes when we're
Most
young.
people are still influenced under their household at age 18.
Absolutely. Oh, I was. When I went to vote, I'll never forget my first time to vote. I just turned 18. I was one of the first ones that was affected by the 27th Amendment. And my dad, bless his heart, they always put a ballot in the newspaper, before an election. And so my dad had gone through and he had circled or underlined all the ones he wanted me to vote for. And he said, well, now you vote how you want to, but if you forget, and he handed me the paper, he said, in case you forget who to vote for, here they are. Yes, we are. And that's a big concept in government, as far as who influences you, and your home is your family, is your key influence on how you vote and your political ideology. Okay, so that's the 27th Amendment is 18-year-olds. So if they did want to start make it to where 16-year-olds could vote, if you got to vote on that as to whether or not that would pass, would you vote yay or nay?
Nay.
Nay, I would too.
Most 16-year-olds in the gosh.
Not too sure about some 18-year-olds. The reason they changed
I'm
it,
17.
I'm not too sure about 17-year-olds, but the reason they changed it was in the middle of the Vietnam War. And they were saying if you can send a young man to Vietnam to war when he's 18, then he should be able to vote. And so that's why they really changed it to 18-year-olds. Okay, residency requirements. Residency requirements. On page 369, talking about voting. And this, I would think this would have come into play some with this past election that we just suffered through, because a lot of people, especially in Georgia, a lot of Democrats, a lot of Republicans went to Georgia to try to register a bunch of new voters to make sure that the Democrats were eligible to get in and control the Senate. And so I don't know what Georgia's residency requirements are. Oftentimes you have to have lived in a state for a little while before you're classified as a resident. You can't just move to a state. I mean, it was funny, right after they decided that they were going to have the Georgia runoffs after the November election because the vote was too close, there were all kinds of people, some very well-known actors and actresses, that were saying, I'm moving to Georgia. They weren't really moving to Georgia, they were just moving to Georgia long enough to vote. That's wrong. That should not be allowed. And I don't know that it was, but there's some question to all of that. I do know that they registered a whole lot of new young people in Georgia to vote. That really probably made the difference in the runoff election. But who knows? It is what it is. So we're finishing up our terms here, Jayla. So the residency requirements do apply, and I mean, oftentimes if you go to vote, you have to prove who you are. You have to show a photo ID often, and that's just recently changed in West Virginia. For many, many years, you didn't have to have that. But now, if you go, you have to have some proof of residency. Sometimes you even have to show a bill, that you've received a bill at that particular address, just to prove that you didn't just cross over the border, say you're moving to whatever state, and you really haven't moved there because you're not even receiving mail there. So sometimes that is required. Okay, so that's residency requirements. The precinct, that's just simply your voting district. Do all of you know where your precinct is from where you live now? Okay, you probably do, because especially some of you that did vote in this last election. For instance, where I live out here on Halls Ridge, probably Stephen's family too, Johnson Chapel is my precinct. This is where I vote. So that's all that means, is that's just your voting district. That's your area where you vote. Now, if for some reason you're unable to be at your voting district, at your precinct on the day of the election, sometimes they will allow you to vote somewhere else. But you end up voting what they call a provisional ballot, which means it might get counted and it might not. So, if there's real questions, it probably would be thrown out. I know where I worked the polls several years. If I didn't early vote, I wouldn't be allowed to vote because I'd have to vote the provisional ballot. And I never wanted to do that because I felt like probably those are the last things ever counted, if they are counted. And they're only counted because it's a tight election. But because when you work the polls, you have to be there an hour before they open, and you usually stay about an hour after they close. And so your precinct will be closed as well by the time you leave the one that you're working. Okay, anyway. Registration, all states are different, but you do have to register to vote. Every state except North Dakota, your book says, requires voters to be properly enrolled with local election officials. Some people can vote the same day. Some states won't let you do that. Most states you have to register a week or so in advance at least. But some states, I've known that some states will let you come in, register to vote, and go over and vote right there at the same place. And again, all of this is to ensure that we have one person, one vote. That's just and fair, and that should be the way it is. And you want to give everybody an opportunity to vote. You don't want to suppress anybody's vote. You want everybody their vote to count, but you also only want it to count once. It's not fair for somebody to be counted 100 times. And so, one person, one vote, one count. And there's going to have to be some changes made. Our country really messed up. I think our country really botched this last election. We were a laughing stock around the world because of how stupid our election turned out. You know, you had the election on November 3rd, and it's January 20th before the definitive answer is made as to who's going to be president.
Do you think the Electoral College should be revised?
I like the Electoral College. I don't want to mess with the Electoral College personally. I think the Electoral College is what gives states power. Without the Electoral College, just the big cities in our country are going to run the country. I mean, they're going to rule. And little states with very small populations like West Virginia, we won't even matter, and we would get to the place where we didn't even vote because it wouldn't matter. If you don't take each state and each state worth a certain number of votes, points, it's just going to be a mess.
Well, like in context to California with West Virginia, we don't even have a chance.
Well, I mean, yeah, California always goes blue, but the thing of it is, recently, and this may change, I mean, Californians right now are very disgruntled with their governor. They've put forth a motion, put it into motion, one of those progressive reforms that I've talked to you about before, where they can recall someone. They're trying. There's a group in California, and they've just about got all the signatures they need on their petition to have a special election to remove the governor of California. Of course, if they remove him, then they have to have another election as to who they're going to replace him with. So whether or not they'll do that, who knows? But they've done that before. California recalled a governor, I don't know, it's been maybe 15 years ago, and replaced him with Arnold Schwarzenegger, the Terminator. They made fun of him. They called him the Governator. But he...
Wasn't he, like, very strict on gun laws?
I think he was much...
In his movies, he's like...
Yeah. But still yet. He was their governor then, I think for 2 terms. I think he won 2 terms. But they got rid of the governor before that by that method that we've talked about before called recall. So anyway, I don't know. I don't like to see us messing with the way things our founders made them. You know, the Electoral College was designed originally to give each state a sense of purpose and importance. More than the individuals of the country, the states. We are the United States of America. There is a reason why we're called that. We're not the United Individuals of America. We're the United States of America. So states have to have importance as a unit. Now, one other thing I was going to say about California, as a result of COVID and some of the lockdowns and some of the unrest that's been happening all along the West Coast, California, Oregon, Washington, a lot of people have left. I mean, they've moved out. A lot of them moved to Florida or Texas. Now, whether or not that's going to change the dynamic of how they vote in the future is be interesting to see, but we'll just, it could. It could be that California will not always be an automatic Democrat 55 points because that's what they're worth in the Electoral College. But it also may change Florida and Texas to be moving more toward Democratic leaning too. So it's hard to say. We just live in extremely strange times. But nothing's new under the sun. These things have all happened before in some fashion or form. Okay, so to be registered, again, the Constitution does say that state elections are determined by the states. So the states get to make up how they do it, what their registration rules are, what their rules are as far as early voting and all these different things. Each state is different because that's what the Constitution says. It, again, it's meant to give the states power. So that's the way that is, that's constitutional. Okay, the next two go together, poll tax and the 24th Amendment. A poll tax is simply forcing somebody to pay to vote. I mean, this was one of the Jim Crow laws of the South. You remember the Jim Crow laws of the South?
Those were the laws against blacks, right?
Yeah, they were all ways in which the South attempted to maintain control over the former slave, the now freed man. And the Jim Crow laws, they're also called the Black Codes. You know, they had the grandfather clause. Do you remember what that one did? Said, sure, you can vote. Well, we know you can register to vote. Everybody can vote. Black, white, everybody can vote. You can vote if your grandfather voted before 1860. Well, 1860 was a year before the Civil War even started. So most blacks, their grandfathers definitely would have been slaves, and they would not have voted. So automatically that got rid of some people. But if that didn't work, then they made what they called the literacy tests, where you had to read something and take a test on it. And this wasn't something simple like, you know, see Jane run down the hall. This was, you had to read like their state constitution, the Alabama state constitution, and then take a test on it. I mean, that would be tough for anybody, because that's the party of the first part, the party of the second part, and the party of the third part doesn't care. You know, it's just all these legal terms. So, and then the third thing was what we're just talking about right here, was the poll tax. If all else failed, they would charge people to vote. Well, they were too poor to pay for anything, so they were definitely too poor to pay to vote. So obviously this was designed to get rid of poor whites and blacks from voting. And these things were all in play, even in the 1960s, especially this one. And that's why they came up with Amendment 24 that said that's illegal. You cannot charge people to vote. So the 24th Amendment is the no poll tax amendment. I mean, look at that, 1964. Now I know to you guys, 1964 is way, 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 way back there. But I was 6. I was a spring chicken. I wasn't even a chicken yet. I was a chick. I just busted out the egg, I guess. But anyway, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 then is the next. Well, no, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 is the next one. And again, this is what this Civil Rights Act made it illegal for anybody to discriminate against blacks in restaurants and motels and on buses and on trains or planes. You didn't have a white section and a black section. You had, everybody was supposed to be, there was not supposed to be any discrimination. Because in the 60s, guys, even in 1964, there would have been restaurants that would have been, this is the black section. This is the black table back here in the corner all by itself. And if that table was filled up, then they had no, and even if everything else was not filled up, they wouldn't let a black person come into the restaurant. I mean, it's sad, but it's true. When I got married the first time, and moved to McDowell County, we moved to Coalwood, little town on the other side of Welch. And I remember this, I saw this with my own eyes. When we rolled into that town, they had a pool, a community pool, and it said on it with a great big sign, whites only. That was in 1978. Whites only. And then before I was gone from there, they had taken that down. But they had it to where if you wanted to swim in that pool, you had to pay a yearly membership fee, which a lot of the blacks couldn't afford it. So that was again designed to keep them out. It's sad. I mean, those kind of discriminatory actions are wrong, and yet our people have done them. If you remember, that's why civil rights is where the government is supposed to act to give somebody their civil liberties. Somebody's civil liberties are being denied them, so the government is supposed to get involved and do something about it. And actually, there was a Civil Rights Act of 1864. Actually, it was 1865, I think. But there was no federal teeth in it. There was nobody to enforce it. And therefore, for 100 years, blacks were on the books, which in government that's de jure. On the books it said that they had these rights, but in reality, de facto, they didn't. So, that we'll talk more about that at another time. So the Voting Rights Act of 1965 did away with anything that was to obstruct or keep blacks from being able to vote. The Voting Rights Act of 1965. And that was during LBJ's administration, both of those, the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act of the 60s. And of course, he was Democrat, and that's one of the reasons why a lot of blacks, even today, still vote Democratic, because they feel like the Democratic Party is the only party that really supports them. But you have to remember that it was Abraham Lincoln, the first Republican president, that is the one that about Emancipation Proclamation that freed the slaves. So anyway, I wish we could get away from so much party, and get into people. What the people are for and what they stand for and what they want to do. Okay, Stephen, it's your turn, buddy.
The lemon test.
The lemon test.
It was a thingy. It was like they made it after a court case. The Lemon versus
Kurtzman. Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what it is. But
Oh my goodness, you wanted this one yesterday, and I deliberately
I
left
looked it
for
up,
you.
but all I kept seeing was stuff. It was just saying that they made it after they had the.
Did you read it in your
Lemon versus
book?
Kurtzman. No, I looked it up.
Okay. It should. Let's see what page it's on. It has to do with the way in which they distinguish what is being discriminatory, what is being, hang on a minute, let me see if I can find where it is. The lemon law, the lemon test. It may not be in this chapter. It should be.
Miss Hoffman, do you have another one of those terms papers?
Do what, honey?
Do you have another one of those terms papers?
Yeah, hang on just a minute, I'll find it. Okay. Lemon v. Kurtzman. Look in the back of your book. It'll tell you. It's the best description of the lemon laws. Page 466. Page 466. I'll just give you mine for right now.
I had one this morning, but I don't know where.
That's all right. Okay, so Lemon versus Kurtzman, you see the court case there? Supreme Court ruling that state statutes affecting religion must meet 3 requirements to be acceptable. The state law must have a secular legislative purpose. That means it's non-religious. Secular in purpose. It can neither advance or to be proper English, nor inhibit religion. So it can't promote one over the other, but it also can't deny rights to one over another. And the third test, it cannot foster an excessive government entanglement with religion. Okay, so this is the lemon law, the lemon test. not the lemon law, that's something else. Where the state law must have secular legislative purpose, it has to be secular, it cannot be religious. It can neither advance nor inhibit religion, and it cannot foster an excessive government entanglement. And that is the test to prove that it is a good civil rights legislative law. Okay, what's the next one there since I gave them away?
Precedent. I got a picture of it.
Okay, precedent. You all know what precedent is, right?
It's
What
like
is precedent?
those people.
No, those are presidents, ding-a-ling. Precedent, I mean, the way I look at it might be relatively simple, I guess. But it's a decision based on a previous decision. That's the way I see it. Oh, I'm glad I insured that. I hope I